You're listening to the Live Out Loud podcast with River Wynn and Michelle Flamer.
Hello friends, this is River, and this week I am recording a solo cast all about solo hiking and solo travel, which are two of my favorite topics that kind of go hand in hand. This week, Michelle and I are not able to record together, and so we're both working on solo casts to share with you this week, which is a little bit different, but also kind of fun. So when I was contemplating recording this episode, I actually put up a question box on Instagram to find out what you wanted to know about solo travel and solo hiking, because there's always so many questions about it. But before I answer those questions, I want to talk a little bit about my experience with both solo hiking and solo traveling. I'm going to start back to when I was a kid, very briefly. When I was a child, I loved to read about other countries. I loved to read about travel. I also spent a lot of time in nature with my family. We did a lot of hiking, a lot of camping. I was very blessed to have exposure to that in my childhood. A lot of kids don't get to have that, and I'm so grateful I did, because it gave me a comfort with nature that a lot of people don't have until they get out there and try it. So I was pretty lucky in that sense. But as a kid, I had this vision of my life that I would grow up and be this adult who was out in nature all the time, and that I was traveling the world. I would write short stories about visiting Italy someday in the future, or imagining my first time flying. And so I had this goal as a child to really spend a lot of time doing those things. And wonderfully, that kind of came to fruition when I was about 19, 20 years old. As a child, I did get to travel somewhat frequently around the Pacific Northwest with my family. We did a lot of camping and visiting on the Oregon coast. We did a lot of exploration. Every year we did a big family trip to check out different bird migration areas. So wildlife refuges, places like that. We visit a lot of geology sites. I learned a lot about crystals and rocks and local just landscape in Oregon specifically. And it was really cool to have that experience. But I hadn't really traveled outside the country or too far until I was 19, and I took my first solo trip across the border into Canada. I took a train from Portland to Seattle, and then I boarded a bus from Seattle into Canada. And that was such a cool experience, because it was my first time traveling in that capacity by myself, my first time going out of the country by myself. And while I was there to visit a friend, so much of the trip was done solo. And what a cool experience that was for me, to get to test my wings and just get comfortable and dip my toes in the water. And what a gentle way to ease into it by going by train. Traveling by train, if you haven't done it before, is such a fun experience, because you get to sit back and just watch the landscape from a totally different perspective. And I really enjoyed that. Train travel may not be ever for everyone, but I personally loved it. But after I did Canada, I did it again. I actually did it twice. And then when I was in my early 20s, I also traveled solo to Colombia, South America, which was really incredible, because it was my first time flying out of the country like that. It was a full, almost, I think if I remember correctly, it was 28 hours of travel with 3 different layovers in different countries. Because of course I was traveling as cheaply as possible. And sometimes when you're traveling as cheaply as possible, that means taking a ticket with multiple layovers. And that was kind of a fun adventure in of itself, because for the first time in my life, I was in a different place where people spoke a completely different language as their primary language. And fortunately for me, I spoke enough Spanish that I was able to successfully navigate airports in different countries. But it was a little daunting, of course, and I had some challenges, especially around vocabulary and just, reading people's body language and just being in a totally different place. It was a great experience, though, and taught me so much. And I was there. I went to visit a cousin who was living in Colombia, teaching for a while, and I got to explore Colombia, and it was just such a beautiful, beautiful place. What's fascinating is that before I left, everyone was telling me, oh my God, don't go to Colombia. It's so dangerous. There's a lot of stereotypes about Colombia, about drugs and kidnappings and all of that. But, I actually felt so safe, and I learned on that trip how to trust my intuition and my body responses and to pay attention to my surroundings. And I never had anything that happened that made me feel unsafe. A huge irony was that while I was on that trip, there was actually a shooting at a mall in Portland where I was living, Portland, Oregon. And some of my friends were working at the time, and it was super scary for them. And so I think that's just a great example of people can tell you that travel is scary. And yes, absolutely, there are so many horror stories around people's experiences with travel in different places. But I will also say that as someone who has traveled and gone to places that are quote unquote dangerous, anywhere you go can be dangerous if you're not paying attention and you're not using your brain and paying attention to your surroundings. So don't let warnings about danger hold you back from traveling, because you might miss out on some of the best experiences of your life if you let that fear hold you back. So really, I've done a lot of solo travel and solo hiking throughout my adult life. I started solo hiking again when I was 19, 20, and I lived in the Portland area, and there's so much access to the outdoors in Oregon, regardless of whether you live in a big city like Portland or you live out rural where I currently live. Oregon is a great state if you want to get out and start hiking. When I lived in the Portland area, there were so many hikes even within the city that made it so accessible for me to get out and feel comfortable being in nature and hiking and feel safe. So I did a lot of that throughout my 20s, and then into my 30s, I have continued to hike and travel, and I use it as a very intentional tool for spending time with myself and getting to know myself, for deepening my intuition, trusting my body, understanding what I'm capable of, and feeling empowered to get out there and not let fear hold me back from living my best life out in the world. When I look back at my 20s and my younger 30s, I recognize that solo travel and solo hiking was truly an outlet for me to get through some of the most difficult moments of my life. And it gave me space to process emotions and difficult feelings within my body. It got me out of the house. It helped me create safety within myself and relationship within myself. So truly, this tool, I really see it as a tool, has just helped me grow as a person. And now that I have been single for 2.5 years, I view solo travel and solo hiking as a continued way to get to know myself and to really ground into hobbies, I guess you could call them hobbies, experiences that bring me a lot of joy, that bring me a lot of expansion, and truly have just given me such a deep sense of trust in myself and my body. I think that's really my biggest takeaway from all of my solo traveling and solo hiking, is that there's a trust I have with myself because I spend so much time alone. It really gives me the space to create deep connection with myself physically and emotionally. And I think that's such a beautiful tool. There's so much to be said for intentionally creating space to connect with yourself. And for some people that may look so different, but for a lot of us, it can look like getting out in nature. It can look like traveling, because those are two areas in which you have so much time to be with yourself, whether you're driving for 6 hours or you're spending 2 hours on a trail or you're on a 13-hour flight. It is time in which you have to be with yourself, which can be very uncomfortable, especially if you're new to solo hiking and solo travel. But I will say that the more time you spend doing it, the more comfortable you become being with yourself. And that's where truly the deep connection and relationship back to you and getting to know yourself comes from, is in that space. So now I'm going to answer questions from Instagram, because I think it's so cool to hear what you want to know about solo travel and solo hiking. So the first question was best places to travel. My answer to this is, oh my gosh, this is going to totally depend on what you love to do and where you want to go. But I'll share some of my favorite places to travel thus far, my personal experience. I will say that I tend to choose my travel destinations based on my budget as a single mother and the current chapter of life that I'm in. I also really love to be out camping, and I like to be in nature as much as possible and away from a lot of other humans. So for me, travel has really been, the focus has been to get deeper into the outdoors. And so I love the Pacific Northwest. I love the Pacific Northwest for traveling. I love road trips. Anything that involves being on the road, camping, being away from other human beings, that really lights me up. So I tend to do a lot of road trips around the Pacific Northwest. I love Oregon. I love Washington. I love Utah. Oh my gosh, talk about an amazing destination state. You could spend years in Utah and still not take in everything that state has to offer in terms of landscape and diversity of landscape. It's a beautiful place to be. I also really love Canada. For cities, I love Vancouver. Vancouver is such a friendly city. People there are so nice, and there's so many beautiful things to do in the city, around the city, so many like little day trips you can take when you're in the city. You can go outwards. I really love Vancouver. It's one of my, it's the city I've gone to the most outside of the US. I know it's so close to the US. It's like right on the border of Washington and Canada, right? But I love it. Also, because I've been there before and I want to go back, Colombia. Honestly, Colombia is such a gorgeous country. Gorgeous. Beautiful. The food is... I'm still dreaming about the food I had in Colombia sometimes, you guys. It's just so good. The people are so friendly. Like I said before, I never had a moment where I felt unsafe, like truly unsafe. Everyone was so nice to talk to. And yeah, it was just a great place to visit. Can't recommend it enough. Moving on, the next question was favorite thing about solo travel. And I said this a little bit before in my intro, but really, truly, my favorite things are having the time to be with myself. It feels so empowering to deepen trust in my intuition and my own physical capabilities. Especially as women, there's this narrative, especially I will say here in the US, I think, speaking to my own experience being American, we kind of grow up with this idea that there's so much unsafety in solo travel. And I know that there's so many people who've had that experience, so I don't want to downplay safety as a concern, but I personally have never experienced true deep unsafety in my travel, whether it's international or it is local in the Pacific Northwest. Like, I've never had anything happen that made me truly scared and afraid. So breaking past that barrier of fear was a big deal for me. So it really is just so empowering to be able to trust your intuition and deepen that trust in your surroundings and your abilities, your capabilities. So that's one of the favorite things for me. And then honestly, like trying new food, like anywhere I go, I'm always on the hunt for a little local coffee shop, little hole in the wall places to eat, food carts. I'm a foodie. So one of my favorite things about solo travel is the food. And honestly, camping food, I love camping food. So when I'm solo traveling, I am checking out new restaurants, but I am also buying things like in the regional area that are the highlights of the regional area, whether it's fruits, veggies, meats, cheeses, whatever it is from that area, and then cooking them over a campfire, making food when I do my car camping. I love it. It's so good. Next question is, how do you know a location or facility is safe for solo women before you go? I think that depending on who you talk to, you're going to come across different responses to this because everyone has different levels of comfort. And for me, I do a very practical thing. I check, like if I know I'm going to go to a specific place and I'm not certain what it's like or if it's a safe place, I actually check reviews. So like if I'm going to stay at a hostel or a hotel or something like that, or a camping ground. A camping ground is a great example of this. I will check out reviews for that place and I will read all the reviews and just kind of get a feel for who's staying there, what their experience has been, how, am I seeing more men than women? Am I seeing a mix of people, or am I seeing female travelers who are giving good reviews? Google Maps is a great way to check out those reviews, especially for like more rural areas, even like more remote locations. So for example, when I did a solo trip last year, there was a hike I wanted to do that was a little less populated. And so I went to that hike location on Google Maps and I looked at the reviews for it, and I got a good sense that there were a lot of women who were using this trail. And so I could reasonably expect to feel safe on that trail. Here's a caveat though. You cannot guarantee your safety anywhere you go. Even if you're with other human beings and you're traveling with other people, you cannot 100% guarantee your safety anywhere you go. So it's all about that gut feeling, your intuition, paying attention to your environment, and using logic. If you don't feel safe, get the fuck out of there. That's what I'm going to say about that. I'm also a part of many solo female travel groups on Facebook. And so if there's a specific location I want to go to, I will also sometimes type in the search bars of those groups the name of this location or the facility and see what pops up around it. Female travelers are really good about sharing their experiences in these groups in particular. So if you want to solo travel or solo hike, get on Facebook, join female-focused hiking groups, female-focused solo traveling groups, van life groups. There's a wealth of information in there, and you might even find places that you hadn't thought about going on your route in that process. So those are my two favorite suggestions for that. Next question. How do you know what trails are safe without a dog? Okay, I'm a dog owner, and I want to say I do not rely on my dog for safety. And that might be a little bit of a controversial opinion because a lot of women rely on their dogs for safety. But I'm going to tell you, here's why I don't rely on my dog for safety. One, my dog is deaf and she relies on me for safety. We are a team, but there are a lot of limitations to her abilities. And also there's a lot of trails out there that you cannot take your dogs. National parks are a great example of this. 2 years ago, I went on a road trip and I went to Zion National Park. And as I was preparing for this trip, I discovered, which I hadn't known before, that dogs are just not allowed in national parks. Like they can be in the parking areas, maybe the campgrounds. There might be 1 or 2 trails that your dogs can go on in national parks, but in general, as a whole, dogs are just not allowed in national parks. So I had to make this choice of, well, I love having my dog on hikes with me, but there's a specific hike in Zion National Park I wanted to do, and I cannot take her. So I had to utilize a doggy boarding facility outside of Zion National Park, like a dog daycare for the day, and she stayed and played with other dogs while I was out hiking in the Narrows at Zion National Park. You cannot rely on your dog for safety. I think that there are a lot of situations in which it is advisable, safe, comfortable to have your dog with you, but also you have to take care of your dog and you have to know their limitations. And yes, they can absolutely alert you to danger, and absolutely, depending on the breed of your dog, can be intimidating for other human beings who might come across your path and maybe be unsafe towards you. But really, truly, your dog has to rely on you for safety just as much as you have to rely on your dog. So I would never go into hiking asking what trails are safe without a dog, because my mindset is 50% of the time I'm not going to be able to have my dog with me because of trail limitations, etc. So I wouldn't recommend that as a way of planning for your safety. This next question is so fascinating because this person asked, do you pack bear spray, flatware, or a gun? And I think it's probably going to shock a lot of people when I say what I'm about to say, because I'm a very liberal person, and a lot of people who know me will probably be surprised by this answer, but I am very pro carrying a gun as a solo female traveler hiker. I do not possess one myself, but I'm actually in the process of going to take a concealed carry class and gun training this summer, and this is something I've been preparing for a while, and here's my reason for it. I live in an area where I do a lot of hiking in spaces where there's a ton of wildlife, like cougars, bears, wolves. I had a friend recently go trail running in a very populated area, and a wolf ran right across her path. I have personally come in contact with bears while out hiking, and I've never had anything bad happen. Most of the time, they're going to be more scared of you than you are of that. Well, maybe not. You'll be scared of them too, but they're going to run off. They're not going to attack you. That said, I feel like I would be more comfortable in terms of wildlife carrying a gun. And that's something I feel good about, and not everyone's going to agree with that, and that is okay. I currently carry a knife and bear spray when I go out, because you never know, and you can use those things in any situation. Why am I going to go from that to a gun? Because I just have seen in recent years an increasing rise of stories of cougars, bears, wolves, wildlife interacting with human beings in a way that causes harm and death sometimes. So as I've seen an increase in that, particularly in rural areas, I feel more comfortable having that for myself. That is not going to be true for everyone. I think you should follow what feels comfortable to you. I've never been in a situation where I felt like I needed to have a gun, but it's something I actually would feel comfortable knowing how to use, and having a very small one that I can carry to protect myself, my kids, and my dog. Because, another shitty thing I've heard people say about hiking is, well, if you have a dog, at least if an animal attacks you, they'll go after your dog first. And my thought is, why the fuck would I be okay with a cougar eating my dog? I want to protect my dog. I don't want anything happening to my dog. So it's just a safety measure that I am particularly for myself going to utilize in the future. And like I said, not for everyone, but that is okay. The next question was around that safety factor in other countries and locations. And really speaking to, there's so many rumors and stories you hear about travel and safety, especially for women, that can be just so daunting. And this person asks, like, how do you know what resources are dependable? And while I have traveled a lot, I will say I have not done extensive international travel, so I can't really speak to that. But I know for myself that I do a lot of research before I travel. And like I said, I utilize a lot of Facebook groups to witness, read, hear about other women's experiences in particular around travel. And it's been a really helpful tool. Again, when you're listening to the people's stories, you're taking into account their personal experience, and not everyone is going to have the same experience. So I really think that you have to use your logic and intuition when you travel. And, resources that are dependable, I think, are connecting with locals. How do the locals feel about the spaces that they live? And really just, I also like to use travel guides that are, reputable. So looking up resources like that. I was that really nerdy kid who loved watching travel shows. And to this day, I still love watching travel shows. So I kind of tend to use those as my resources a lot of times. And I use a lot of books, travel books that are travel guides that are written by people who've done extensive research and experience in traveling in particular areas. I have a book of Pacific Northwest road trips I recently acquired that I am so excited to use because there are some routes in there that are just so cool that I never would have thought to put together. And they did the research, and they've listed recommendations for safe campgrounds or safe hotels, depending on what it is that you're looking for, and great places to go and experiences to have. So if you're someone who is newer to travel, I would definitely recommend utilizing things like that until you feel comfortable and safe enough to do your own research and experimentation by just getting out there and seeing what happens. And the last question was, do you ever feel like the environment you're in is unsafe due to sharing space with large wildlife? I'm terrified of the idea of camping alone in the woods. Yeah, totally. That is something that used to be really daunting to me before I started solo camping because of the stories that you hear. And I will say, I car camp and I tent camp, and I do it a lot on my own. I spend a lot of weekends doing things like that, solo traveling around the states and the Pacific Northwest. And every summer now I have 2 weeks free to myself without my kids, where I primarily do car camping and road trips. And I will say I've gotten very comfortable with solo tent camping and car camping. But for myself, I'm probably not going to go out in the middle of the woods where there's absolutely no one around and be by myself. I'm not at that level of comfort yet. I am planning this summer to do an overnight backpacking trip where I am going to be camping at a remote location, but it's enough of a populated hike that I know that there will be other people also camping in the same area. And so I will not be entirely alone with the wildlife. As I've gotten more comfortable out in nature in the woods, I can count on one hand the number of times I've run into bears. And I can count on one hand the number of times I've run into wildlife other than deer that were larger wildlife. So I feel like the odds are so low that you're actually going to experience situations with larger wildlife like that, because most of the time they want to stay away from you just as much as you want to stay away from them, truly. So like being loud out in the woods, making lots of noise, just having a big presence is probably going to be okay, keep you safe. But in terms of camping, it can be really alarming sometimes to be in a tent by yourself and hear a coyote running through your camp. That's happened to me. Here is what I personally have done. I use good food storage systems when I am camping. Bear canisters. I use a heavy duty cooler that's stored in my car. I keep food above, away, out from anywhere near my tent. I eliminate the food source as much as possible so that animals are not attracted into my campsite. I also just feel more comfortable staying at campgrounds, even if they are like less densely populated campsites, like we're talking like maybe there's 5 campsites and there's 2 of them occupied, even knowing there's another human being around makes me feel more comfortable. And I always trust my gut with that too. If I pull into a campground and there's a solo dude by himself, I'm probably not going to stay at that campground just for my own comfort, trusting my gut on that. But when I do find a place that I feel comfortable with, I usually go around and introduce myself to the people who are camping there so that I feel a little more comfortable talking and being there, and we're all kind of keeping an eye on each other, especially women. I look for older couples and women to talk to, and that's just something I do for myself, and it's helped me feel a little bit more comfortable, because if people know your name or your face, they're going to watch for you. That's something I do when I'm solo hiking too. I usually talk to other hikers on the trail, usually women and older couples or families, married couples, because if people see you, they're going to remember you usually. And that's a really helpful thing for feeling comfortable, then also just like safety. But speaking to being in nature with, a lot of animals, that kind of goes back to my personal comfort level around, I carry bear spray, I carry a knife, I have ways to protect myself. And like I said, I will be utilizing a gun in the future for my own safety and protection. And that's just something I'm comfortable with. So I would really recommend, don't let your fear hold you back, because camping can be such a empowering and fun experience, even solo. Honestly, some of the best nights of my life have been nights where I am solo camping at a quiet campground. There's just a few other people and it's out in the middle of nowhere, and I wake up and I smell the woods and I hear the river running nearby, and my dog is snuggled up with me and I'm making my coffee in the morning. It's so peaceful. It's so peaceful. It's such a good feeling. Don't let that fear hold you back if you can, and start with baby steps. Go to a campground that's 10 minutes away from town, where you're close to town. If you get scared and need to go home, you can do that. Start with baby steps. Do car camping. Put a mattress in the back of your car. I have an SUV and I put a twin mattress in the back of my car a lot of times when I'm road tripping, because sometimes I know I'm going to be going to an area where it's going to be super rainy, and I just don't want to deal with putting up my tent and potentially getting things damp and wet and dealing with that. So I just camp in my car. There's all different ways that you can approach getting into camping solo or with a partner and feeling more safe. And it's just those baby steps, I think, sometimes. The last thing I want to say about solo hiking and solo camping before I close out, you guys, is that it's truly an empowering experience when you get past fear. Fear is just a limitation. Fear is just a block. And if you can recognize it as such and ease yourself into the thing that you fear, the other side of it can be such a beautiful experience, because you're learning new skills. You're pushing past your comfort zone. And we don't grow when we stay in our comfort zone. Then that's okay. If you don't want to grow and you're fine in your comfort zone, I totally get it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But there's so many things that you are maybe missing out on that you would actually enjoy if you let yourself push past the fear. I'm really grateful that my solo trips in the past, I haven't let fear hold me back, particularly with traveling out of the country as a woman traveling solo. I could have decided that was too daunting and stayed home, and I never would have had the experiences that I did that were so beautiful and that I treasure to this day. And now I'm constantly itching to go back to some of those places because it was such a great experience. So truly, fear is only a roadblock if you let it be. That's all I'm going to say today about solo hiking and solo traveling. I'm sure we'll chat more about in the future, because Michelle and I both love to do it, and we love to encourage people to do it. And we've had guests on the podcast who are also super into it. If you haven't listened to our episode with Gila Milamed, I totally recommend it. She is a solo traveler who lives in her car year-round right now, and she's traveling all across the U.S., and she has some absolutely beautiful stories about her travels. She recently released a book that we will share in the show notes because we love her. We love her book. But I really hope that you use this as inspiration to get out there and just enjoy the world. It's a beautiful world, you all. And on that note, have an amazing day. Can't wait to share more with you soon. If you enjoyed this episode today, be sure to subscribe and share because what do we say, baby?
Sharing is caring.